May 18th, 1565. The largest invasion force in the Mediterranean appears on the horizon. 40,000 Ottoman soldiers, 193 warships, sent by Suleiman the Magnificent to erase one tiny island from the map, Malta, home to the last crusaders on earth. 500 warrior monks called the Knights Hospitaller. For 43 years, these soldiers of Christ have raided Ottoman ships, freed Christian slaves, and defied the Sultan's empire. Now Suleiman, 71 years old, has come to finish what he started at Rhodes in 1522. The Knights have 500 men. They are outnumbered 80 to 1. But they have taken vows to God to fight for Christ until death. They will not surrender. They will not retreat. They will not kneel. This is Suleiman's last crusade. This is the Great Siege of Malta. Let's go back to where this all began. Because Malta wasn't random. This wasn't just another Ottoman conquest. This was personal. In 1520, Suleiman becomes Sultan of the Ottoman Empire at age 26. He inherits the most powerful Islamic empire the world has seen since the caliphates. But he wants more. He wants to be remembered as the greatest sultan in history, the one who finally drove Christianity out of the Mediterranean, the one who conquers Rome itself. And standing in his way are the Knights Hospitaller, the Knights of St. John, also called the Hospitallers. They weren't just soldiers, they were monks, men who had taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience to God. But they had also taken another vow, to fight, and if necessary, die, defending Christianity and the faithful. They were the last of the true crusaders, the final remnants of an age when Christian warriors marched to Jerusalem, singing hymns and wielding swords in the name of Christ. And in 1522, they held the island of Rhodes right at the doorstep of the Ottoman Empire. For Suleiman, Rhodes was intolerable, a Christian fortress in what should be an Islamic sea, a base from which these warrior monks launched raids on Muslim shipping, freed Christian slaves, and humiliated the Sultan's navy. So in the summer of 1522, Suleiman came for them, 100,000 Ottoman soldiers, 400 ships, against 7,000 knights and defenders. The siege lasted 6 months. The knights fought like men possessed. Every breach in the walls became a killing ground. Every assault was met with such ferocity that the Ottomans bled themselves white, trying to break in. Women fought on the walls. Old men carried ammunition. Children brought water to the defenders. The entire Christian population of Rhodes became a single organism of resistance. But numbers don't lie. By December 1522, the walls had been pounded to rubble. Disease and starvation had ravaged the defenders. Half the knights were dead. The civilian population was dying. The Grand Master of the Order, a man named Philippe Villiers de l'Isle Adam, negotiated a surrender with Suleiman. And here's something remarkable. Suleiman gave them terms. He allowed the knights to leave with honor. They could take their weapons, their flags, their holy relics. They could board their ships and sail away, because even Suleiman, the conqueror, the warrior, the Sultan, respected their courage. There's a historical quote attributed to him as he watched the knights leave Rhodes. "It pains me to force this brave old man from his home." Suleiman was young, magnanimous in victory. He thought the knights were finished, that they'd fade into irrelevance, become monks in some monastery somewhere, praying and growing old. He was catastrophically wrong. In 1530, 8 years after Rhodes fell, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V granted the knights a new home, Malta, in exchange for one symbolic rent, 1 falcon per year. The knights accepted, because what choice did they have? But Malta was nothing like Rhodes. Rhodes had been beautiful, fertile, prosperous. Malta was described by contemporaries as nothing but rock and sky, 12,000 inhabitants, no natural resources, barely any fresh water, summer heat that could kill a man in armor. It was a barren waste. But the knights didn't complain. They got to work. From 1530 to 1565, they transformed Malta. They built fortresses. They dug wells. They trained the local Maltese population. They rebuilt their navy. And they went back to doing what they'd always done: raiding Ottoman shipping. The knights became what some called Christian pirates. They'd sail out of Malta, intercept Ottoman merchant ships carrying silk and spices from the east, free Christian slaves chained to the oars, and sail back to Malta with captured treasure. They were relentless, fearless, and extraordinarily effective. Between 1530 and 1565, the Knights of Malta became the single greatest threat to Ottoman control of the Western Mediterranean. And Suleiman, now older, angrier, hated them for it. Year after year, the raids continued. The humiliations mounted. The Sultan's advisors whispered, "The Knights mock you. They are a cancer on the body of Islam. They must be destroyed." But it was one raid in particular that pushed Suleiman over the edge. In 1564, a knight named Romegas, one of the most daring commanders in the order, captured an Ottoman treasure ship. This wasn't just any ship. On board were the Ottoman governors of Cairo and Alexandria, wealthy men, powerful men, heading to Mecca on pilgrimage. But also on board was someone even more important to Suleiman personally, his elderly former nurse, an old woman who had cared for him as a child. Now in her 80s, heading to Mecca to fulfill her religious duty before she died, she was captured, held for ransom, paraded through the streets of Malta like a prize. For Suleiman, this was the final insult. 71 years old now, knowing his time was running out, knowing that his legacy would be defined by what he accomplished in his final years. He called his advisors and he gave the order: assemble the fleet, gather the army. We sail for Malta. And this time, there will be no terms, no surrender, no mercy. The Knights of St. John will be exterminated, every last one. This wasn't just military strategy. This was revenge. A 43-year grudge match between an empire and an order of warrior monks, between Islam's greatest sultan and Christianity's last crusaders, between two 71-year-old men who had been enemies since they were young. Suleiman and the Knights' new Grand Master, a Frenchman named Jean de La Valette, had both survived Rhodes in 1522. Both remembered that siege. Both knew this would be the last time they faced each other. One of them would die. The other would become immortal. Jean de La Valette. If you're going to understand why Malta survived, you need to understand this man, because he was the rock on which the entire defense was built, born in 1495 in southern France. Noble family, could have had a comfortable life as a lord, wealth, power, a wife and children. Instead, at age 20, he joined the Knights Hospitaller. He took vows: poverty, chastity, obedience. But most importantly, he took the vow to fight for Christ until death. And he meant it. In 1522, he fought at the Siege of Rhodes. He was 27 years old. He saw the walls collapse. He saw half the knights die. He watched as the order was forced to abandon their home. He swore it would never happen again. In 1541, de La Valette was captured by Ottoman corsairs during a naval battle. He was chained to an oar in a Turkish galley, enslaved. For 1 year, Jean de La Valette, a nobleman, a knight, a warrior of Christ, rode in the belly of a Muslim warship, whipped, starved, surrounded by the screams of dying men. Most men would have broken. De La Valette's hatred of the Ottomans only grew stronger. He escaped during a Christian raid on the galley, fought his way free, made it back to Malta. And from that day forward, he was a man with a mission. In 1557, at age 62, Jean de La Valette was elected Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller, and he immediately began preparing for the war he knew was coming. Contemporary sources describe him as a formidable old man, tall, lean, grey-bearded, with eyes that could cut through steel. He spoke 8 languages. He was a master swordsman. He could outthink most generals half his age, but more than that, he had absolute faith. Faith in God, faith in his order, faith that if they stood firm, Christ would deliver them. He wasn't a fanatic. He was a realist. He knew the Ottomans were stronger, better supplied, more numerous. But he also knew something the Ottomans didn't, that 500 men who believe they're fighting for God are worth 5,000 who are only fighting for gold. From 1557 to 1565, De La Valette prepared Malta for siege. He reinforced Fort St. Angelo, the main fortress at the tip of the Birgu Peninsula. Massive walls, overlapping fields of fire, bastions designed to withstand the heaviest artillery. He built Fort St. Elmo, a new star-shaped fortress at the entrance to the Grand Harbour. Small, but positioned to control access to the port. He built Fort St. Michael, defending the city of Senglia. But he didn't just build walls, he built a spy network. Knights stationed in Constantinople sent word. Informants in North Africa reported troop movements. Captured Ottoman sailors were interrogated. By 1563, 2 full years before the invasion, De La Valette knew it was coming. He knew Suleiman was building a fleet. He knew the Sultan had sworn to destroy Malta. He knew the storm was gathering. So he prepared. In the spring of 1565, De La Valette gave orders that shocked the Maltese population. Harvest all crops, ripe or not. Bring everything inside the fortress walls, poison every well outside the fortifications. Fill them with animal carcasses, dead horses, dead dogs, anything to make the water undrinkable. Demolish every building within cannon range of the walls. Houses, barns, churches, anything that could provide cover for Ottoman sharpshooters. Leave the Ottomans nothing. No food, no water, no shelter. The Maltese people protested. You're destroying our homes, our livelihoods. De La Valette's response was cold and true. If the Ottomans take this island, you will have no homes, no livelihoods, no lives. You will be slaves or corpses. Better to burn your houses now than watch the Turks burn them with you inside. He was preparing for total war. But De La Valette's greatest strength wasn't his tactical brilliance, it was his leadership. He gathered his knights in the chapel of St. Angelo, all 500 of them, and he spoke. Here's what we know, he said, reconstructed from multiple historical accounts. Brothers, we are the last crusaders, the last warriors of Christ who hold territory in our own name. Jerusalem fell, Acre fell, Rhodes fell. We are all that remains. The Turks are coming, 40,000 of them, perhaps more. They have cannons that can shatter castle walls. They have the best soldiers in the world. They have time supplies, ships. We are 500 knights. We have 6,000 total defenders if you count the Maltese militia and the Spanish reinforcements. We are outnumbered 7-1. Humanly speaking, we cannot win. But we are not here to win. We are here to hold. Every day we survive is a day that Europe prepares. Every Turk we kill is one less attacking Rome. Every hour we stand is an hour that Christendom remains free. You took vows, poverty, chastity, obedience, but also this, to fight for Christ until death. Today, God asks you to fulfill that vow. I will not order you to die. But I ask you, will you stand? Will you hold this rock against the greatest empire on earth? Will you be the shield of Christendom one last time? Or will you flee and let the Turks march to Rome unopposed? Every single knight knelt. Every single one vowed to stay, to fight, to die if necessary, for God, for Malta, for Christendom. This wasn't bravado. This wasn't propaganda. These were men who genuinely believed that their soul's eternal salvation depended on fulfilling their vows, that if they died defending the faith, they would wake up in paradise. They weren't afraid of death. They were afraid of failing God, and that made them the most dangerous warriors on earth. May 18th, 1565. Dawn breaks over Malta, and on the horizon, sails appear. Not one, not 10, 193. The lookouts on Mount Siberus saw them first. They rang the alarm bells. The sound echoed across the island. Church bells joined in, a cacophony of warning. The Ottomans had come. Across Malta, the civilian population dropped everything and ran. Farmers abandoned their fields. Fishermen abandoned their boats. Mothers grabbed their children and sprinted toward the fortress cities of Birgu and Senglea. Because they knew what was coming. Everyone knew. The fleet was massive beyond comprehension. 193 galleys and warships. The sails stretched from horizon to horizon. 15,000 sailors and oarsmen, most of them Christian slaves, chained to the oars, rowing their Muslim masters toward a Christian island. And on board, 40,000 soldiers, 6,300 janissaries, the Sultan's elite infantry, young men taken from Christian families as boys, converted to Islam, trained from childhood to fight and die for the Sultan. They were the best infantry in the world, disciplined, fearless, fanatical. 9,000 Sipahi cavalry, the Ottoman heavy cavalry, noblemen who fought on horseback with lances and sabers, and 25,000 more, North African Berber warriors, Barbary corsairs, irregular troops, volunteers seeking glory and plunder. 40,000 men. Against Malta's 6,000, the invasion was commanded by 3 men. Mustafa Pasha, age 60, commander of the land forces, a cautious, methodical general, veteran of a dozen sieges, personally chosen by Suleiman. Piali Pasha, age mid-30s, commander of the fleet, young, aggressive, ambitious, the hero of the Battle of Djerba in 1560, where he destroyed a Christian fleet. And the third commander wasn't there yet. But he was coming. His name was Dragut, Turgut Reis, known to Christians as Dragut, 80 years old. The drawn sword of Islam. The most feared corsair in the Mediterranean. A man who had fought the knights for 40 years. A man who had raided Christian coasts from Spain to Sicily. A man who answered only to the Sultan himself. Suleiman had personally asked him to come to Malta. Finish this, Dragut. Wipe them out. And Dragut, though old, though ready to retire, could not refuse his Sultan. He would arrive in 2 weeks, with 13 more galleys and 1,500 elite fighters. But even without him, the Ottoman force on May 18th was overwhelming. The fleet sailed past the Grand Harbour. The Ottoman commanders looked at the fortifications and understood immediately. Fort St. Elmo commanded the harbour entrance. Its cannons could sink any ship trying to enter. The main harbour wasn't accessible, so they sailed south, to Marsaxlokk Bay. And there, on May 19th, they landed. The first 500 soldiers waded ashore. De La Valette sent 300 arquebusiers, soldiers with early firearms, and a unit of cavalry to meet them. There was a brief, bloody skirmish. Shots fired, swords drawn, men screaming. The Maltese killed perhaps 50 Ottomans, lost 20 of their own, then retreated. It was symbolic resistance, a message. We're here, we're not afraid. But everyone knew the truth. You can't stop 40,000 with 300. May 20th. The main force landed. 25,000 more soldiers disembarked. Horses, camels, supply wagons, 70 enormous siege cannons. It took 2 full days to get everything ashore. The Ottomans set up a fortified camp near the village of Marsa, just south of the Grand Harbour, and on their march north toward the harbour, they passed through a small village called Zeitun. Zeitun had about 200 inhabitants, Maltese farmers, fishermen, their families. The Ottoman commanders sent a message. Submit to the Sultan. Convert to Islam. You will be spared. The villagers refused, every single one. The Ottomans put the entire village to the sword. Men beheaded, women killed, children killed. Bodies left in the streets as a warning. News of the massacre spread across Malta within hours. The message was clear: resist, and this is what happens. But it had the opposite effect. The Maltese population, who had never particularly loved the Knights, who saw them as foreign occupiers, rallied to their defense. Because this wasn't about politics anymore. This was about survival. This was Islam versus Christianity, the crescent versus the cross. And the Maltese were devoutly Catholic. They would rather die than submit. 4,000 Maltese men, farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, took up arms, grabbed pikes, swords, rocks, whatever they could find. Old men who could barely walk volunteered to carry ammunition. Women volunteered to repair walls, nurse the wounded, make gunpowder. Even children, boys as young as 10, volunteered to run messages, bring water to the fighters. Malta became united in a way it never had been before. From his headquarters in Fort St. Angelo, Jean de La Valette watched the Ottoman army grow like a dark stain spreading across his island. 40,000 men, 70 cannons, the greatest military force the Mediterranean had seen in generations, against his 6,000. One of his advisors asked him, "Grand Master, what are our chances?" De La Valette's response is recorded in multiple sources. Our chances of survival? Almost none. Our chances of victory? 0. But our duty? Absolute. We will hold this island as long as God gives us strength. And when we can hold no longer, we will die with swords in our hands and prayers on our lips. The Turks may take Malta, but they will pay for every inch of it in blood. May 21st, 1565. The Ottoman army marched north from their landing site toward the Grand Harbour. They crossed the barren Maltese landscape, rocky, hot, barely any shade, and all the wells they found were poisoned, dead animals floating in the water, the stench unbearable. De La Valette's scorched earth strategy was already working. The Ottomans reached Mount Siberus, a hill overlooking the Grand Harbour, and from that vantage point they saw the fortifications. Fort St. Angelo, massive, commanding the southern end of the harbour. Fort St. Elmo, star-shaped, at the northern tip of a peninsula, controlling the harbour entrance. Fort St. Michael, defending the city of Senglea, and the walls of Birgu, thick, angled, built with the latest military architecture. This was not the defenseless waste they'd been told about. Mustafa Pasha and Piali Pasha held a council of war. Mustafa wanted to march inland, attack the old capital of Mdina first. It was poorly defended. Capturing it would demoralize the Christians. Piali disagreed. No, we need the harbour. Our fleet can't stay in open water forever. We need a safe anchorage. That means taking Fort St. Elmo first. Mustafa. St. Elmo is small, but it's well defended. It could take weeks. Piali. Weeks? Look at it. It's 200 yards across. Maybe 150 defenders. Our cannons will level it in 3 days. We'll storm it on the 4th. By May 25th, we'll be inside the harbour. The debate went back and forth, but Piali's argument won. They would take St. Elmo first. Fort St. Elmo sat at the tip of the Siberius Peninsula, between 2 harbours. Its cannons controlled the entrance to the Grand Harbour. It was small, the smallest of Malta's 3 main fortresses. But its position was critical, and the defenders inside knew it. May 22nd through May 24th, the Ottomans positioned their artillery, 60 cannons, enormous bronze bombards, some of them so large it took teams of oxen to move them. They positioned them on Mount Skyberas, overlooking Fort St. Elmo from high ground. 3 rows of artillery, front row, light cannons and culverins for harassing fire. Middle row, medium cannons for sustained bombardment. Back row, basilisk bombards, massive siege guns that fired stone balls weighing up to 600 pounds. The guns were positioned 600 paces from the fort, close enough to be devastating, far enough to be safe from St. Elmo's return fire. Inside Fort St. Elmo, 450 men prepared to die, 150 knights, the best fighters in the order, 200 Spanish soldiers, professional fighters sent by the Viceroy of Sicily, 100 Maltese volunteers, men who knew this was almost certainly a suicide mission, but volunteered anyway. They gathered in the fort's small chapel. They knelt, they prayed, and they waited. May 24th, 1565. 4 in the morning, the Ottoman artillery opened fire. 60 cannons fired simultaneously. The sound was like thunder, like the world ending. Stone cannonballs, some weighing 600 pounds, flew through the air and smashed into Fort St. Elmo's walls. The limestone exploded on impact. Shrapnel flew. Dust and smoke filled the air. The defenders couldn't see, could barely breathe. The noise was deafening. Men screamed, though you couldn't hear them over the cannons. The walls, 30 feet thick in some places, began to crack. This was the beginning of the bloodiest siege of the 16th century, and it would not end the way anyone expected. The bombardment continued for 12 hours straight. By nightfall on May 24th, sections of St. Elmo's outer walls had collapsed. The defenders frantically rebuilt them with rubble, piling broken stones back into the gaps, working all night, because they knew. Tomorrow, the cannons would fire again. Across the harbour, Jean de La Valette watched from the walls of Fort St. Angelo. He could see the constant flashes of cannon fire, the smoke rising from St. Elmo, the walls crumbling. One of his officers said, "Grand Master, they cannot hold. We must evacuate them." De La Valette shook his head. "They must hold, as long as possible. But they'll die. Yes, they will die. And in dying, they will save Malta. Every day St. Elmo stands is a day the relief force gets closer. Every hour buys us time." The officer was silent. Then de La Valette added quietly, "They know what they're doing. They are fulfilling their vows. There is no greater honor." The bombardment didn't stop at night. Every few hours the Ottoman guns would fire, just to keep the defenders from sleeping, to wear them down mentally. It was psychological warfare as much as physical. Piali Pasha was confident. He told his officers, "St. Elmo will fall in 5 days, perhaps less. The walls are already crumbling. By May 29th, we will be inside the Grand Harbour." But Piali Pasha didn't understand what he was facing. He didn't understand that the men inside St. Elmo weren't fighting for gold or glory or land. They were fighting for God. And men who believe they're fighting for God don't surrender. They don't negotiate. They fight until they can't lift their swords. And then they die. May 25th, 1565. Day 2 of the bombardment. Inside Fort St. Elmo, The defenders gathered in the chapel before dawn. They knelt on the stone floor, and they prayed the prayer that knights had prayed before battle for 400 years, the Paternoster, the Our Father. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. The chaplain gave them communion, the body and blood of Christ, because they knew some of them would be dead before the sun set, and they needed to be in a state of grace. At dawn, the Ottoman cannons resumed, and this time something different happened. After 2 hours of bombardment, the cannons stopped, and 6,000 Ottoman soldiers charged. They came like a wave, Janissaries in the lead, the Sultan's elite, crimson robes, plumed helmets, screaming Allahu Akbar as they ran. Behind them, thousands more, Sipahi, corsairs, irregulars, all of them rushing toward the breached walls of St. Elmo. The defenders watched them come. Knights gripped their swords, Spanish soldiers leveled their arquebuses, Maltese militia picked up pikes. The commander of St. Elmo, a Spanish knight, drew his sword and raised it high. He shouted to his men, "Brothers, today we prove that the servants of Christ do not fear death. For Christ and St. John." The defenders roared back, "For Christ and St. John." The Ottomans hit the walls like a battering ram. Ladders went up. Men climbed. The defenders met them at the top. Sword against scimitar. Pike against shield. Point-blank arquebus fire into charging soldiers. The killing began. For 5 hours they fought. Ottoman soldiers poured through the breaches. The defenders pushed them back. Bodies piled up. Blood soaked into the limestone. Men screamed, prayed, cursed, died. By sunset, the Ottomans withdrew. They had been repelled, but they left behind 400 dead. 400 Ottoman soldiers killed in one afternoon, for a fort that was supposed to fall in 5 days. Inside St. Elmo, the defenders counted their losses. 30 men dead, 50 wounded. But they had held. As darkness fell, they went back to work, rebuilding the walls, treating the wounded, burying the dead, knowing that tomorrow the cannons would fire again, knowing that tomorrow the Ottomans would come again. The commander of St. Elmo wrote a message to Jean de La Valette. A messenger would swim across the harbor that night to deliver it. The message was short. We held today. The Turks bled heavily, but our walls are crumbling. We need reinforcements or we need to evacuate. We cannot hold indefinitely. Please advise. At midnight, a knight stripped to his underclothes. He tucked the waterproof message pouch into his belt. He whispered a prayer, and he dove into the dark waters of the Grand Harbor. 400 yards to swim, in darkness, with Ottoman patrol boats searching for swimmers just like him. If he was caught, he would be killed. But the message had to get through. Across the harbor, Jean de La Valette couldn't sleep. He stood on the walls of Fort St. Angelo, watching the flashes of cannon fire in the distance, watching St. Elmo die inch by inch, and he faced the hardest decision of his life, because when that message arrived, he would have to answer a question that would determine the fate of Malta. Do you abandon St. Elmo to save those 450 men? Or do you ask them to stay and die to buy time for the rest of Malta? Do you choose mercy, or do you choose duty? The defenders of St. Elmo had been given a mission: hold as long as possible. But no one, not even Jean de La Valette, knew how long as possible, would be. The Ottomans said 5 days. They were wrong. What happened over the next month would shock the Ottoman Empire to its core, and it would cost 8,000 men their lives. May 26th, 1565. Dawn. The Ottoman cannons opened fire again. The siege of Fort St. Elmo had begun, and it would become the bloodiest month of the 16th century. 150 knights against 6,000 janissaries, against the greatest empire on earth. They were supposed to fall in 5 days. Instead, they would hold for 31. And in those 31 days, they would kill 8,000 Ottoman soldiers. They would mortally wound Dragut, the greatest Ottoman admiral in history. They would break the Janissary Corps in half. And they would prove to the world that faith can move mountains. Or in this case, can hold a fortress when every law of war says it should fall. This is their story.